Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to talk about infections, a parasitic infection. So, there is a young man, 24-year-old. He presented with chief complaints of fever with chills and rigors, which was also associated with right hypochondriac pain, which was radiating to shoulder, with the past history of diarrhea, with stools which were offensive in order, mixed with blood and mucus. On examination of the patient, leukocytosis was observed, and when an ultrasound was done, a single hypoechoic lesion is seen in the right lobe. So the most probable diagnosis is anyone? Anyone can take that question? Okay. So it is amoebiasis.
Right? So because of
So what are all the intestinal protozoa we know other than amoebiasis? Giardia, Sporidium, you have Isospora, you have Microsporidia, and you also have Cyclospora. There are lots of species which are all intestinal protozoans. Entamoeba histolytica being the most common. So the parasites which affect the man are Entamoeba histolytica, E. coli, E. hartmanni, gingivalis, and Dientamoeba. There is a big list. The free living are Acanthamoeba and Naegleria. Now coming to the epidemiology, usually these infections or parasitic infections, they affect the low socio-economic countries or underdeveloped countries or developing countries like India. And it is the third, amoebiasis is the third leading parasitic cause of death. It usually exists as a commensal in majority of the people, and only about 10% develop the disease. 90% are asymptomatic, but even asymptomatic patients, they pass on the disease to others. So it is commonly present in the colon, and less frequently it is also seen in liver. The main reservoir is man, but it can be seen in other animals like dogs and cats. So what is the lifestyle like, life cycle of this parasite? So it consists of 4 consecutive stages, starting from mophozoid becomes precyst, cyst becomes precyst, and cyst is developed into metacyst. So initially what happens, the cysts are passed into the stools. These are they are ingested by the person, and these cysts go into the stomach, but these cysts are resistant to gastric acid, and from there they pass on to the small intestine. In the alkaline weather of the small intestine, the cyst is digested by the intestinal enzymes, and these active amoebae, they get separated from the cyst wall and are released to the lumen of the small intestine. Here they mature in the cecum, and then they multiply, and hence again they form into the precyst form, and from precyst, cyst is formed, and cyst is excreted in the stools. So this is how it happens. So this is the life cycle. You can see there is a or water contamination. The cyst enters the stomach. Here in the stomach, it is resistant to acid content of the stomach, and here passes on into the small intestine, where the encystation and tetranucleate amoeba are released. Here the metacystic they are going to affect the intestine. They invade the intestine, and they form abscesses in the intestine. From intestine also, they can go into the portal vein, and they can form an abscess in the liver or lungs or brain. And can also go into the wall of the large intestine, where they form the precyst, and then cyst is the precyst gets encysted, and these cysts are passed on into the feces. Now, how are they transmitted? Like, what is the mode of transmission? Ingested cyst usually they are in the excreted in the feces. They contaminate the water, food, or through infected hands. Like if someone is not using proper sanitation after going to the after defecating, they can pass on those cysts into the food. So foodborne is the most common method of transmission. Less common means will be oral or anal sexual. Where we see many of us, we in our hospitals we do colonic irrigation. Even through irrigation, this can be inoculated.
Enlargement of segment, that is caudate lobe is mainly affected, that is segment 1.
So pathogenesis, what is the pathogenesis like? These trophozoites, they can destroy almost all tissues of the human body. Especially intestinal mucosa, liver, brain, and skin are also most commonly affected. So there are addition molecules, toxins, proteases, cytolysis, and phagocytic activity. These are the virulence factors. So pathogenic amoeba are involved in active. The colonic mucosa is invaded, and there is rapid lysis of the mucosa. There is tissue necrosis because of lysis, because of apoptosis in the cells, surrounding cells. This necrosis, again, it may cause ulceration. This ulceration may deepen and progress under the mucosa, thereby causing flask-shaped ulcers. So this, from the intestine, the infection also can spread to the portal circulation and into the liver. So the pathogenesis is like this. So the primary infection lies in the colon. It can, through portal circulation, it can go into the liver and cause hepatic amoebiasis, which we call it as liver abscesses. And from liver abscesses, it can rupture into the skin. So if it is in the outermost side of the right lobe of the liver, it can rupture outside. It can cause skin cutaneous amoebiasis. Same thing, it can also rupture into through the diaphragm into the lung, where it can cause pleuropulmonary amoebiasis. From hepatic amoebiasis, again, it can also rupture into the peritoneal cavity or pericardial cavity and form amoebiasis there. The primary infection can also, as such, from the colon can also go to the peritoneum or perianal skin, causing cutaneous amoebiasis. There can be a hematogenous spread which can go into the brain, spleen, or kidneys, and very rarely adrenals also. So these are the methods of spread from the colon that we can see. How does the patient present to you usually? We've already discussed it is pain abdomen and diarrhea. So many patients, as I told, 90% of the patients are asymptomatic. 90% of the patients are asymptomatic. Only 10% go into a symptomatic stage. Wherein we have intestinal amoebiasis, which is the most common. The next common is amoebic liver abscess, and I have already discussed the complications. Amoebic liver abscess can rupture, or it can be the peritoneal amoebiasis can occur via the colon also. And we also have pericardial amoebiasis, pleuropulmonary amoebiasis, and cerebral amoebiasis. Cerebral amoebiasis is very, very rare. Almost less than 0.1% of cases they go into cerebral amoebiasis, and this, if they rupture, it is fatal to the patient. And genitourinary amoebiasis, cutaneous amoebiasis. So the most important is intestinal amoebiasis. Intestinal amoebiasis, how does it occur? The onset is very insidious. You don't have any toxic symptoms initially, so patient has a mild discomfort except for loose motions. Usually the patient can have 10 to 12 loose motions, and all the loose stools, they are accompanied with blood and mucus in the stools. And there is tenesmus in the rectosigmoid involvement. Usually these patients, they will not complain of fever or weight loss or any other constitutional symptoms. They are not present. You only have abdominal discomfort, loose stools accompanied with blood and mucus, and there can be diffuse pain abdomen. Tenderness may be there in the lower abdomen, and you can also have a slightly enlarged and tender liver if at all there is infection in the liver also. So there is a point of Manson-Bar. Anyone who knows who is Manson-Bar? Manson-Bar, no, person who has written the textbook on infectious diseases, tropical diseases. So this person, he has seen that there is a point of tenderness in cases of intestinal amoebiasis, which is towards the left side of the abdomen, from the umbilicus down towards the left iliac fossa. So this point is called as point of Manson-Barr, which is named after the famous personality Manson-Barr. So what is the pathology like? There are small in ulcers which involve the cecum and rectum. Initially the ulcers are superficial, only a slight scraping of the mucosal layer is seen, and later it becomes hyperemic, and then there is a necrotic base which is covered with yellowish exudate. So this sometimes what happens, this erosion can occur over a blood vessel. Whenever there is erosion in the blood vessel, that blood vessel erosion can cause brisk bleeding. So the patient can pass blood in the stools. So the very rarely, the ulcers may perforate and the patient may go into peritonitis, and this is again an emergency. If they are very small ulcers, maybe the patient will not come to you very fast. But if the ulcer is a large one, it is a surgical emergency. Okay, these are how the ulcers look. Usually the upper portion very little bit is eroded, but underneath it is a large erosion into the mucosa, submucosa. Right? These are flask-shaped ulcers. So you see ulcers over the colonic mucosa. All these are ulcerations. There are two cases. Very exceptionally, some patients come with toxicity. Because especially in children, not
బాటిల్ కూడా రాయి మళ్ళీ ఇంకోసారి రెండు పదాలు వస్తాయి కదా.
Okay, so there is confluent ulceration and necrosis of the colon, which is called as toxic megacolon, usually seen in children. In these children, they are extremely febrile and toxic, and they may go into shock and electrolytic imbalance. And even if we examine the stool for amoebae may not be recovered from the stools. And especially patients who are on glucocorticoids, any immunosuppressants, these people are more at risk of developing toxic megacolon or fulminant colitis. And there is another entity which is amoeboma. This is actually, it presents as a granuloma, and patients or the doctors may confuse this with malignancy. So you can only diagnose that this is an amoeboma only on biopsy. So amoeboma or amoebic granuloma, it results from repeated invasion of the colon, and upon that there is a pyogenic infection on the invasion of the colon. So on top of invasion by amoeba, if there is secondary infection or pyogenic infection, this leads to amoeboma formation. This amoeboma is more frequent in cecum and rectosigmoid junction, where there is stasis of the feces. So lesions are usually single, and they involve a very short segment of colon. Amoeba are scant and very difficult to demonstrate also. They can be demonstrated via biopsy. If a biopsy is taken from that granuloma, you can see amoeba. The other one is amoebic liver abscess. This is the most common extraintestinal form of invasive amoebiasis. We have colonic amoebiasis. The next most common is extraintestinal one is amoebic liver abscess. This is more frequent in adults, and that too especially alcoholics who are immunosuppressed. And this is more frequent in males than in females. Usually in India, at least in Indian subcontinent, we have males who have a more of travel history than females. So maybe this is one of the reasons why why it is more frequent in males. So 20% of the past history, 20% of the patients will have history. It is only less than 50% of cases we see parasite. The symptoms, how does they come? They may not come to you for a long time, or they may come with abrupt onset of symptoms, or they may come with rupture of the abscess. After rupture, they can come with other symptoms. So usually the patient presents with high fever with pain in the upper abdomen. Pain is instant and constant. It can radiate to the right shoulder and the scapula. This pain, it can increase with breathing, coughing, and even when the patient is lying on the right side. If it is on the right side, the abscess is on the right side, obviously the pain will increase. If it is on the left lobe abscess, obviously the pain will go to the left shoulder and left side of the abdomen. So depending on which lobe of the liver the abscess is there, the symptoms also change. This may also come with anorexia, loss of weight, nausea, vomiting, and easy fatigability. And on examination, you can see a lower intercostal space tenderness can be seen. If it is on the right side tenderness will be there. And temperature will also be raised, usually between 38 to 40 degrees Celsius over several days. Sometimes you can see a mild jaundice in these patients, but it is very mild, minimal, not something like obstructive jaundice, but it is rare, very rare. Mild hepatomegaly can be seen. And if it is a large abscess, yes, you can have a proper hepatomegaly, you can feel it. But mild hepatomegaly is seen in most of the cases. And older patients, usually older patients from endemic areas, they are they are the ones who tend to have this larger abscesses and hepatomegaly. And they tend to have a prolonged subacute prolonged course. So if there is an abscess on the right side, just imagine if there is an abscess on the right side, movements of the chest and diaphragm will be restricted on the left side. And there can be atelectasis or effusion on the right side. If there is any rupture into the pleural cavity, there can be pleural effusion on the right side. Usually lesions are single, found in the right lobe, in the posterior, external and superior portion. These abscesses, they are bounded with a thin capsule and with thick necrotic fluid. This abscess fluid, if you drain, it will not have any smell. It is odorless, and it will resemble chocolate syrup or anchovy paste. Anchovy paste is the typical terminology used for abscess fluid. This is a liver abscess fluid. So these lesions are usually single as compared to pyogenic abscess, where they are found in multiple numbers. So this is a typical CT finding wherein you can see a nice rounded abscess. Same thing on ultrasonography. You can see a abscess with some fluid, dirty fluid inside the abscess. Next one is once this rupture, this liver abscess, if it ruptures into the peritoneum, you can have peritoneal amebiasis, or it may occur from perforation of the cecum also. So there will be sudden increase in pain. Obviously, whenever there is a peritoneal rupture, peritoneal abscess from peritoneal perforation, you will have abdominal pain. And the pain will be generalized. If you take an X-ray, you will have free air in the peritoneal cavity, and you can have guarding and rigidity depending on the size of the perforation. So pericardial amebiasis, most serious complication, but it is quite rare, very, very rare. So it occurs in less than 1% of liver abscess, especially on the left side. Very logical. The left lobe, if it is having an abscess, that can rupture into the pericardium. So perforation into the pericardium, it is followed by sudden tamponade, cardiac tamponade occurs, and the patient may go into sudden shock. So these abscesses into the pericardium, they can develop loculations and the pericardium will become thickened. Next one is pleuropulmonary amebiasis, wherein the lung parenchyma is most commonly invasion is due to extension from the liver abscess. So hematogenous spread is very rare into the pleural cavity. Clinical symptoms of liver abscess, they usually followed by severe chest pain and radiating to the right side if it is on the right side. If it is on the left side, it will be on the left shoulder. So the patient will have breathlessness, the patient can have non-productive cough, and if there is bronchohepatic fistula, then they can cough out the abscess fluid, like dark brown expectoration can be coughed out. The superimposed infections are most common in these cases. So this is a chest X-ray wherein the liver abscess has ruptured into the right side of the chest, wherein you have a minimal pleural effusion is there, and there is raised right side diaphragm is raised. The cutaneous amebiasis usually results from perforation of an abscess or intestine into the skin. I've already told you right side abscess, right side liver abscess can rupture or perforate into the skin, or if it is from the cecum or rectum, it can also come out through the skin. Surgical wounds usually get infected secondarily with internal amoebic lesions or in perineal or genital area. So ulceration with extensive necrosis is seen. Parasite may be seen in the overlying exudate. These are the examples of through the abdomen it has ruptured and caused a cutaneous amoebiasis is seen. This is perineal region. I have already discussed cerebral amoebiasis involvement is seen in very less than 1% of patients. Symptoms depend on size and site of the lesion. Abrupt onset of symptoms can occur with rupture, or the patient may die within 3 days. The next one is, it's also a very rare complication, genitourinary amoebiasis. So renal amoebiasis is a rare complication of liver abscess. Again, it occurs through rupture of hepatic abscess, or sometimes it can occur through blood spread, hematogenous spread from the lesions of liver or lung, or it can be extended through the lymphatics. So genital lesions, they are very infrequent and they are caused by fistulas from liver abscess or rectocolitis. These lesions, they are painful, punched out lesions with profuse discharge can be seen over the genital area. So what are all the other things we need to think whenever we are thinking in terms of diagnosis? So what are all the things which come under differential diagnosis? So if there is mild pain, motions are there, loose stools are there, the stools are infrequent, but there is mild discomfort in the abdomen, you can think about irritable bowel syndrome also. Bacillary dysentery, this we can know upon investigation. Stool examination will differentiate between bacillary dysentery and amoebic dysentery. But whereas in amoebic dysentery, almost always there is blood in the stools, bacillary dysentery may not have. Inflammatory bowel disease is another differential diagnosis you need to consider. Appendicitis, so whenever there is any typhlitis, then amoebic typhlitis also mimics appendicitis. So carcinoma colon or ileocecal tuberculosis. We have told repeated invasions of the colon which can cause amoeboma. Amoeboma can be a differential diagnosis for carcinoma colon or ileocecal tuberculosis. Amoeboma is easily treatable, so you need to confirm that it is not amoeboma or it is carcinoma colon or ileocecal TB, and then you can go ahead with the diagnosis. So after differential diagnosis, how do you diagnose that this is a case of amoebic liver abscess or amoebiasis? So amoebiasis, you can see if you examine stool, you can see cysts and trophozoites in the stool. A wet mount can be done from the stool. A stool is taken, diluted with water, and then it can be examined directly under microscope. You can see cysts and trophozoites. On examination, you can also, the stool is almost always positive for heme, that is blood is passed in the stools, and there will be very few number of neutrophils in the stool. You can also do a culture, stool culture can be done. This can distinguish pathogenic amoeba from non-pathogenic strains. So sigmoid colon can also be, you can do a colonoscopy or sigmoidoscopy. You can also look for trophozoites presence. And liver aspirate usually never gives amoebic because in the liver that fluid you never always have amoeba. Amoeba is not seen in the liver aspirate. Usually the amoeba are present over the capsule. So if you can just take out a little bit of capsule, you can see amoeba in that. You can demonstrate amoeba there. So this is, you do a stain. So this is a trophozoite wherein there are RBCs in the trophozoite. So the three, you can see three cysts here. And this is an iodine stain. This is a wet mount. Direct stool wet mount. Right? So this is how a direct wet mount looks like. The cyst looks like a brown thing with a nucleus. So other investigations which are useful for diagnosis, but we'll have to investigate anyways. So anemia is seen in many of the patients because of because of infection for a long duration. So anemia will be there because of loss of blood in the stools. Leukocytosis can be there. The liver enzymes, if at all there is a liver abscess, liver enzymes can be elevated. And there are other serological tests which can also give, because amoeba, identification of amoeba directly from the stool is quite, so it's seen only in 50% of patients. We can go ahead with serological tests. So serological tests like immunofluorescent antibody tests or radioimmunoassay, all these tests can be done. So on radiology, so you can see mucosal edema, hostile blunting, and ulceration. Ulcers are usually their collar button or crash-shaped ulcers. And in cases of toxic megacolon, there will be toxic dilatation of colon. And in cases of ameboma, you can see intraluminal mass or annular lesion or irregularity of the bowel wall. So this is a healthy colon wherein you don't see any loss of hostations. Here in amoebic colitis, there is loss of hostations and it is edematous and swollen. Okay. You can do a sigmoidoscopy. Sigmoidoscopy will be sigmoid colon, and colonoscopy can be done up to the secant. So other things, isotope liver scan can be done. Ultrasonography for location of the liver abscess or for knowing the size of the liver abscess. You can for draining purposes you can do a ultrasonography. CT scan can also be done. Even MRI can be done to localize the lesions. Now coming to the treatment. So what do we have in treatment? So we know how the patient presents. The patient presents usually they have a history of travel. The patient presents with mild abdominal discomfort with loose stools. The stools are accompanied with mucus and blood. Right? So some patients may have constitutional symptoms wherein the patient has toxic or fulminant colitis. Otherwise, generally the patient is afebrile. The patient does not have fever. From there, so these are the other things which we have discussed is one is how the amoeba affects. So it can affect in the like amoebiasis wherein they have loose stools. The amoebiasis can also occur. It can go into the liver and cause amoebic liver abscess. It can go into the peritonitis. It can cause pleuropulmonary rupture. It can rupture into the pleural cavity and cause pleural effusion. It can also be spread via bloodstream into the kidneys or brain or heart anywhere. Right. So all these are the things, major things where the amoeba can be affecting the patients. Apart from that, how do you diagnose? So you can do a stool culture or stool examination. Examination is equally effective. So if you are in doubt whether it is a bacillary dysentery or amoebic dysentery, you can go for a stool culture, wherein you can culture amoeba, and there you identify. You can also go with other radiological investigations like ultrasonography, CT or MRI. Now, after diagnosing that this is a case of amoebiasis, how do you treat it? So, most important common things which we get in our day-to-day practices, one is amoebiasis, which is treated in the OP basis. So, one is that. The other one, which we admitted in medicine wards, we have liver abscess, amoebic liver abscess. So, what are the drugs which are available for treating these? So we have two types of drugs. One is tissue amoebicides, and these again have intestinal and extra-intestinal amoebicides. They have intestinal and extra-intestinal effects. Extra-intestinal effect only, again, and we have luminal agents. So we have tissue amoebicides and we have luminal agents. So luminal agents, we have, if you go back to the life cycle of the amoeba, we have trophozoites in the intestine. They invade the intestine, intestinal wall is invaded and they form ulcers. So these are not destroyed by the luminal agents. Luminal agents they only destroy the cysts which are in the colon, in the intestine. These cysts are going to be destroyed by luminal agents. Whereas the tissue amoebicides, they are going to destroy the trophozoites which invade the tissue, be it liver, be it the liver or be it the intestinal mucosa, right? So the drugs available are intestinal or extraintestinal amebicides like metronidazole, tinidazole, ornidazole. Teknidazole, cetronidazole, emitin, dihydroemitin, all are available, but mostly we use metronidazole and tinidazole. Tinidazole is a longer acting and more potent, so we can give it a 2 gram statum dose, which is more tolerable. Metronidazole again we give for 1 week. Chloroquine is the only extraintestinal pesticide which is available with us. Luminal agents, again we have diloxanate furoate and hydroquinol. Paromomycin is also available in our country. So any asymptomatic infections, why do we need to treat asymptomatic infections for it? We need to treat asymptomatic infections because these asymptomatic patients are also going to pass cysts in the stools and they're going to infect other patients. So we need to treat even if they're asymptomatic patients. If we diagnose that this person has an amoebiasis, we need to treat them. How do we treat asymptomatic infections? We give diloxanate furoate 500 milligrams TID because they don't have any tissue infection, they don't have any tissue invasion. So tissue amebicides are not necessary in these patients. Only luminal amebicides are necessary. Luminal agents will be diloxanate furoate or hydroquinol. So either can be used diloxanate furoate 500 mg TID for 10 days or hydroquinol 650 mg TID for 20 days. These either of them can be used. If at all there is intestinal infection, so we need to use both tissue amebicides and we need to use lumicidals. So tissue will be metronidazole 800 milligrams TID for 10 days, followed by, so we are treating the tissue trophozoids. Trophozoids are getting destroyed as well as the cysts have to be destroyed. So we have to give diloxanate furoate, which is a lumicidal, right? So both have to be given here. Metronidazole 800 milligrams TID for 10 days. So what is the side effect of metronidazole? What is the precaution that you will tell the patient? The patient can go into a disulfiram-like reaction if the patient takes alcohol along with metronidazole. So always whenever you are giving metronidazole, you have to tell the patient not to take alcohol. So 800 mg TID metronidazole for 10 days followed by diloxanate furoate 500 mg TID for 10 days. Otherwise, we can also use tinidazole. Tinidazole we can give 2 grams per day for 2 to 3 days. So 2 grams as a single dose is less tolerable. We can split it and give it as 1 gram BD for 2 to 3 days, and then we can follow it by diloxanate furoate 500 mg TID for 10 days. Amoebic liver abscess, similar, same treatment almost like amoebiasis. Here also metronidazole 800 mg TID for 10 days followed by diloxanate furoate 500 mg TID for 1 week, or tinidazole 2 gram per day for 3 to 5 days followed by diloxanate. Or dihydroemitin can be given in a dose of 1 to 1.5 milligram per kg per day intravenously for 5 days. If liver abscess is quite severe, then we can admit the patient and give IV and followed by diloxanate furoate. Or chloroquine 300 mg for 2 days followed by 150 mg for 19 days. Next 19 days, we can give chloroquine. So when do you aspirate? So before going to this, I want to tell for all the students, please, there is no role of albendazole in amoebic liver abscess. I have corrected many papers. All papers include albendazole. I don't know why everyone is writing albendazole. Albendazole does not have any role in amoebiasis treatment. Please make a point. Here we have only metronidazole, tinidazole, or any lumicidals. We do not have any role of albendazole. Please note that. But all there is anything with you in those terms, please delete that. So any indications for aspiration? So aspiration routinely it is not indicated. We have to, for diagnosis, whenever we have any doubt when there are 2 or 3 abscesses, we want to diagnose whether it is pyogenic abscess or multiple amoebic liver abscess. When we have doubt, then we do aspiration and send the sample for culture or examination. Whenever there is an imminent rupture, when the abscess is quite large and you think that it may rupture into the skin or it may rupture into the pleura or it may rupture into the pericardium, then we need to aspirate it. And almost always, all cases of all abscesses in the left side, because left lobe is nearer to the heart, and this rupture of left lobe abscess can cause pericardial tamponade. So we don't want that. So any abscess in the left lobe has to be aspirated. If at all there is no response to medical therapy after 3 days. After 72 hours, if there is still no response, how do we know the response? If at all, so you do a ultrasound, a day 1 ultrasound, look for the size, start treating the patient. Symptoms have decreased, the size has decreased, patient is responding. If the symptoms are not decreasing, the patient still has pain, the patient still has any other symptoms, discomfort and all, you can again switch over to aspiration. And question mark, you want to reduce the period of disability, aspiration. Initially, way back, maybe 10, 15 days, 15 years back, we used to aspirate almost all the abscesses possible. But now we are not doing, because again, it is an invasive procedure. We don't want to harm the patient. So reduce the period of disability, it is query. We aspirate only when we want to diagnose whether it is amoebic liver abscess or pyogenic liver abscess. Whenever there is an imminent rupture, any abscess in the left lobe of the liver, or whenever the patient is not responding to medical therapy after 3 days. These are the most indications for aspiration. How do you prevent this disease? So that is more important. So improve environmental sanitation, water supply, disposal of feces, food safety and health education. And not the last line, but most important is you have to detect it early and you have to treat the patient.